This happened 4 years ago. I lived in Staten Island for a few years before I went to college there. I was about 20 years old at the time. One evening, I went to Need for Speed, a screening in Manhattan. Unfortunately alone because my friend bailed on me last minute. I love Aaron Paul and Kid Cudi and I just had to go, even if it was by myself. As some of you may know, Staten Island is a part of New York City, but still very far from everything. After this awesome event, I headed back to my dormitory in Staten Island, which resulted to be the longest and scariest trip of my life. When I transferred to the 2-to-1 train at Chambers Street, and while waiting for the 1 train, this weird guy approached me and asked for my name. I think his name was Chris. I lied to him and told him that my name was Sophia, and I kept walking away from him. He then offered me candy, which I declined. This was around 9:30 p.m. or so, and welcome to NYC. The train was taking forever to come, which freaked me out even more. He would ask me questions like where I'm from, what school I go to, and I lied every single thing about it. He told me that he lives in Brooklyn, blah blah. I noticed another woman by us who kept turning around to see my situation. I decided to sit next to her and I whispered to her and asked her to pretend that she knew me. She told me how she was going to approach me anyways because she knew I was in a dangerous situation. So the train comes and I decided to miss it. However, this guy Chris tapped me on my shoulder and said, "Sophia, the train is here." At this moment, I got the worst goosebumps and I was sweating so much. I told him, "Oh, thank you, but this is my friend and we're going to talk instead." I thanked the woman who helped me, and I hopped on the next train. When I got to the ferry station, I didn't feel comfortable or safe. So for some reason, I went up to this sweet-looking couple and explained my situation, and they kindly offered that I sit next to them on the ferry. Fortunately, they were traveling on the same bus after the ferry too. Now, you would think that the story ends here. Remember how this guy Chris said that he lives in Brooklyn. As soon as I sit with this couple, I see the guy walking back and forth by us. I informed the couple that this is the guy who was creeping on me. I almost started crying. The couple comforted me and the guy told me how he knows martial arts, which helped me calm down a little bit. However, this Chris guy would not stop walking by us the whole time the ferry was moving, which was about for 20 to 25 minutes. It felt like 300 hours that night. The creepiest part of this situation is that when I thought we lost him while getting off the ferry, Chris walked right by me and he said, "I hope to see you again, Sophia." I wanted to legit disappear from the earth at that moment, and the couple told him off and threatened to call the police on him if he did not stay away from me. Thankfully, the couple and I got on the bus together, and they gave me their numbers to let them know that if I am back to my dormitory safely, since their stop was before mine. When I got to campus, I asked the security guy to drive me back to my dorm, so that I was home safely. Let's not meet ever again, Chris from Brooklyn. You gave me one of the biggest anxiety attacks I ever had. My husband and I bought tickets for a concert at Madison Square Garden back in February. A few months after purchasing the tickets, we decided to make it a long weekend trip, since we haven't done anything too exciting together for about a year. We were planning on spending Thursday through Sunday and doing all the touristy things since I had never been to NYC. I definitely wanted to see the Statue of Liberty, but everything was so expensive. Luckily, I found a free ferry that would take us right past it. It was perfect. That Friday, we made our way to the ferry terminal. We got hot dogs while waiting aboard, looking out the huge window towards the Statue of Liberty. All was well. We boarded no problems, and got a nice rail spot in the side facing away from the statue, because the other side was so crowded. We weren't too worried because we would be riding the ferry back again, after we had explored Staten Island for a while. As the boat began to dock, the crowd moved towards the exit of the boat, and so did we. It was packed tight, shoulder to shoulder, and we shuffled our way out. Just as we had stepped off the boat, I saw this man out of the corner of my eye with his phone pointed towards me. He was maybe in his late 30s. He was moderately handsome. He looked from the Middle East, like Israel, wearing a US polo ball cap. Now, let me set the scene. We are walking through a guided walkway to the terminal. It's pretty crowded. My husband is walking right next to me on my right side, and this guy is on his right side. No joke, this guy was walking shoulder to shoulder with my husband, and he was looking straight forward, but holding his phone up, filming in my direction, pretending like he wasn't. At first I was like, oh, maybe he's filming all the people leaving the ferry. Maybe like a time lapse or something. Don't be paranoid. But it just kept going on, and it looked like it was directly at me. I got so uncomfortable that I put my hand up to cover my face. I took my husband's hand and asked him to slow down. I asked my husband if he noticed this guy, and he did. When we had slowed down, the guy ended up a few steps ahead of us. And I kid you not, this guy held his phone up on his side and continued to film directly at us while pretending to look forward. This is when my husband decided to confront the guy. Mind you, we are walking in a crowd still. He said to him, "Hey, excuse me, but is there a reason why you're filming us?" But the guy just stared at him and then looked away. No response, nothing. Maybe he didn't speak English. We kept walking, and it kept happening. I just held my husband's hand, and held my other hand kind of covering my face. I was so creeped out. Once we were in the terminal, you could either go right and exit to the island, or go straight up some ramps, and we were so freaked out. I was like, babe, we are going this way now. And we walked up these ramps to try to let him drift off of the crowd and exit. The top of the ramps were where the buses were. We didn't plan on getting on a bus. We weren't sure if they were tour guide buses or what. It didn't look like we could technically exit from there. So, we waited a few minutes to make sure that we had lost the guy, and then headed back into the terminal shopping area. It was pretty empty. It looked kind of like a mall, with a gift shop, a little convenience store, an ATM, etc. We stood right in the middle of this almost empty terminal area, while my husband looked up some things to do in Staten Island. And then I saw him again. He walked like 10 feet away from us, still pointing his phone at us. I got ridiculously panicked and was like, "Oh, we have to go, he's here still." At this point, it was painfully obvious that he was filming us. My husband wanted to ignore him and pretend like he's not there, just to see what he does. I tried, but he was literally lurking right there recording us still. I decided to make intense eye contact, like, "I see you, stop doing this eye contact." He then drifts over to the ATM with his phone still up, and while looking at what he was filming on his phone, he pretends to push buttons on the ATM. No card, not even looking at the ATM, just pretending to use it while looking at us and filming. I grabbed my husband's arm and was like, "Okay, we are leaving now." We went back to the mass of people waiting to get back on the ferry. There were 3 police officers and a canine. We stood behind them, watching the doors the entire time to see if he came back in. If I saw him come back in, I was going to grab one of the police officers, but we didn't see him. The ferry runs every 25 to 30 minutes, so we had to stand there and wait. We were so panicked. A family from England wanted to strike up a conversation with us about their vacation that they were on, but I was so focused on watching this guy that I couldn't invest myself in their conversation. From waiting on for the ferry to the ferry ride itself back to NYC, to 3 hours after we got off that ferry, we were constantly looking over our shoulders to see if the guy was still following us. I have never felt so uneasy in my life. I felt like something horrible was going to happen, and I couldn't shake it. Was I being paranoid? I really don't think so, but I'll never know for sure. Was this someone that wanted to hurt or rob us, or just some weirdo filming people to get a rise? I have no idea. But some man out there has so much footage of me, it makes me sick to my stomach. To preface this, I love to drive. Like hour-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind. Just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I would often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities. And I would usually take these drives at night since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license about 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, and for me, to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious, with a cluster of personal issues that I would rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend. I couldn't focus on anything else, and decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too terribly long, since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and I left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life. So, I decided to drive further north down those familiar dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend. And I was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and the barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles back from the road, lightless in the dead cornfields, withered away and covered in the snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then, I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I had made the familiar roundabout, that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city. I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself, I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I noticed a vehicle with its hazards flashing, maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest was jutted out onto the road. Like they had to pull over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. The cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside, with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and read far too many crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was inside that vehicle, and I thought that I needed help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. But still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and I called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out or something, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I would call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave in the moment that there was reception. I would call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I would figure out my next course of action then. So, again, I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah." I was relieved at first, and I was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else in the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car fast. The person did not have any blood on them or appeared injured in any way. They were wearing a mask similar to what you would see in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was, I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment that I noticed those things, and drove like a straight bat out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew that I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road, watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I had made it to the roundabout, I had turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully stole cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what had happened and what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was and did they follow me, he told me since it was out of city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police and sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed and thanked him, and while I was waiting for the police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what had happened, not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked out for my safety, and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him that the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay. But I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot that I told them the sedan had been, to take a look and that they would try to catch the guys who did it. Though with no cameras, and no description of the men, I wasn't sure that they would be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic the thought never came to mind until the police were asking if I had got it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and 2 guys wearing purge masks. After I gave my statement and went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear that it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever they had started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from the police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful that I'm still here, and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get my attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late-night drives to anywhere, and I hope that I never cross paths with those freaks again. My cousin recently reminded me of a memory I had suppressed because it was one of the most terrifying moments of my childhood. I'm from Texas, so we hardly ever get snow days, so when we did, I always tried to take advantage. When I was in 6th grade, my school was shut down for 2 snow days. This never happened. It was a miracle. On one of the days, my cousin came over and we decided to walk to my old elementary school to go play at the park. It was about 4 blocks away from my house. I lived in the neighborhood for years, so I knew someone on almost every block. This is important for later. I always felt safe and I knew the neighborhood, so walking to the park with my cousin was no big deal. We got to the park and surprisingly, we were the only 2 people there. We were having a blast. We moved from the playground to the field behind the playground. To kind of explain the layout, we entered the playground from the back parking lot, so we had to walk through the parking lot to the field next to it to get to the playground. There is a dumpster in the parking lot that was against a brick wall. There was a space between the wall and the dumpster that a lot of teenagers used to hang out behind. On the other side of the wall was the playground, and a few yards to the left of the dumpster was a large field. So, we're enjoying our time when this truck pulled up. There were 2 men in it. I got a really bad feeling. I told my cousin that we should probably head home. My cousin insisted that it was nothing, so I shook it off and I kept playing in the snow. The men got out of the truck and went behind the dumpster. My cousin reassured me that it was not a big deal because, like I said, a lot of people went back there. And that's when they started yelling, saying things like, "Woo, this is gonna be fun." Even at age 11, I was paranoid. "Come on, let's go home, please," she said. "They're not even talking to us, just ignore them." I was in 7th grade, so I listened to her. Until we heard them scream, "What are you girls doing here all alone? Where are your parents? You're here all by yourself." Chills ran down my spine. I was so scared. My cousin and I looked at each other and automatically started walking really fast through the field to head home. The men came out from behind the dumpster and started yelling, "Where are you girls going? We just want to talk to y'all." We were terrified. Our fast walk turned into a sprint. We got to the sidewalk and that's when we heard the truck door slam. My heart sank and I started crying. They peeled out of the parking lot. All I could think is we were about to get taken. The truck was making its way towards us. Knowing someone in almost every block ended up saving mine and my cousin's life. I had a friend that lived across the street from the school. All we had to do was cut across this small neighborhood intersection and we would be there. The truck caught up to us as soon as we had crossed the intersection. They slowed down and the man on the passenger side rolled his window down. "Why are you girls running? We just want to have some fun with y'all." The truck came to a stop, but we had made it. We ran up to the door and started yelling for help and ringing the doorbell. The truck sped off. We were safe, and we told my friend and her parents what had happened, and my mom came and picked us up. We were so scared we couldn't even remember any details about the truck or the men. All I knew was I would never go to that park alone again. If I didn't think to run to my friend's house, I don't know if I would be here. If the men had caught up to us before crossing the intersection, I don't even want to imagine what would have happened. I don't know what the two men were planning on doing to us, but I know that it wasn't good. So, to the two men that ruined my snow day and scared me shitless, let's not meet. One day when I was about 14 years old, I'm 22 now, I was home alone during the summer watching my two younger sisters. At the time, they were 8 and 5, while my parents were at work. Now usually this was a normal thing for me. It was all routine. My parents would leave money, about $20, just enough for pizza if we were hungry. They would come back from work around 5 or 6. This particular day didn't sit well with me because, for one, I was feeling really sick and two, I absolutely hated the rain. The rain was terrible this day, and this was still a time where my sisters were still scared of thunder and lightning. It was really gloomy outside, and I would like to think the creepy part of my day started around noon from what I remember. I was in my dad's room when I heard a loud knock on the front door. Now, we have a TV in the room over where my sister was watching her favorite show at the time. Rugrats. It's completely irrelevant, but I like the show too. Now, something didn't feel right other than me being so sick and not being able to keep anything down. I quickly popped up off the couch and peeked outside through the window in my dad's room, which looks straight onto the driveway. I look in, I see this green truck parked in my driveway, and I quickly thought, nobody in my family has a green truck, and why would somebody be visiting in this horrible weather? So, quickly and quietly, I make my way to my sister's room, and tell her to help me make sure all the windows are locked in the house. While I was in school, I didn't believe in spare keys, so I would hop through all the windows of my home to get in. Now she's pretty freaked out because she had no idea what was going on. After locking all the windows of the house, I told her to grab my youngest sister and wait in the bathroom, and lock the door and to not come out until she heard my voice telling her to do so. I looked out the peephole and I see two men standing at the front door. What looks like they're trying to pick the lock or whatever, but I didn't know what they were doing, I was just freaking out. At this point, I'd already turned everything off to keep from making any noise. I walked quietly to the house phone, and a rookie mistake on my part, called my mother and told her my situation. She had told me to call the police, and that this should have been my first move, and that she would be on her way and would be calling my father. As soon as I hung up, I called the police and told them my situation, and they told me that help would be on the way. By this time, I heard a slam like a door of the car being shut. I look outside and I see the two men had vanished. I guess unsuccessful in their attempt to break into my home, they left upset. The police showed up about the same time my parents did, a few short moments later, and I told them what had happened. The police told me that next time to call them first in a situation like this one, and to thank God nobody got hurt. Honestly, I was only worried about my sisters because if the two men did get in, I wouldn't have been able to take on both of them. After that day, we went on like normal except we went to my grandma's from there on out. I never saw those two men again, and I hope that we never meet. I am and have always been a very small girl, standing at 4'11", full grown now at 27. And I've always been able to pass as being much younger than I am, especially if I'm not wearing any makeup. When I was a small child, about 7 or 8, my father bought a little cabin in a town in Texas called Livingston, in an area of Livingston called Onalaska. I specify because of the second part of the story. Anyone with kids needs to be wary of the area. The cabin was really nothing remarkable at only 600 square feet. It was really just one giant room, a teeny kitchen the size of a normal bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a large closet, and a porch out front. The whole property consisted of 2 lots, so there was plenty of space, but the cabin itself was dinky. This whole area was in a strange mix between backwoods and suburbia. It was a true neighborhood, but not the prim and neatly kept neighborhoods I was used to in suburbia Houston. Despite this, it became a very fond place for me, and some of my greatest memories in life are at that cabin, including my evacuation story from Houston during Hurricane Rita. That is a story for another day. Anyways, around 11 to 12 years old, my father bought me a 4-wheeler, and the little lake town suddenly became a lot bigger. I didn't go super far, but I definitely ended up going further than I had ever gone before. And it was quite common to see me zipping up and down the roads with a pile of neighborhood kids on the back of the 4-wheeler when we would go up to the lake house on weekend visits. This was around 2001 to 2002, so cell phones were a thing, but it was still common for people not to have them. Usually I had a beeper that I carried around, but with no phones at the lake house, my father gave me a walkie-talkie with a very long reach instead. Looking back on it now from a world of cell phones, this seemed like a bad idea. But this was a small town and we had spent so much time here that it felt safe. So one of these weekends, I was buzzing around my neighborhood like I usually did, and I stopped at this peninsula that overlooked the lake. This was a set of docks that us kids always came to when we wanted to swim, despite the very real threat of giant alligators. But being stupid kids, we really didn't worry about that. And I was overlooking the lake when my walkie-talkie buzzed to life. Naturally thinking it was my parents trying to reach me, I answered quickly. I couldn't quite make out what they said at first, so I tried confirming that it was my dad. At this point in the neighborhood was a little ways away from the cabin, but I had reached my parents from this point before, so despite the fact I could not quite recognize the voice, I assumed it was my dad. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was off enough that I remember being slightly annoyed. Garbled questions that I had answered, but no answers that would have hinted at who I was or where I was. Eventually, the conversation started to drift in a way that I knew something was off, but I was not alarmed just yet, as my dad was notorious for pulling pranks on me and goofing around. I kept talking stupidly. Alarm bells weren't going off yet, Finally, though, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie makes a comment. I cannot for the life of me remember what he said exactly, but it was enough to make me doubt that it was my father. This is when things took an extremely creepy turn. Bear in mind, I'd been talking to this guy pretending to be my father for a good 15 minutes, sitting on my four-wheeler on this peninsula. I can see you. You should come take a ride in my boat, he said. My father had a boat, but this was so out of character that it made me realize that it wasn't my father. Dad, you're not Dad, are you? What are you talking about? He said. If you can see me. I started feeling a bit peeved that this guy had been messing with me. What am I wearing? He paused for a second before the walkie crackled to life, and he said very clearly, You're wearing an orange shirt. You have red hair and you're sitting on a red four-wheeler right by the swim docks. Why don't you come for a ride in my boat? At this point, my eyes widened and my blood ran cold. This entire time, some strange guy that I didn't know had been watching me from God knows where. It took me maybe 10 seconds to look around wildly and then kick the four-wheeler up and race out of there so fast that the wheels had a hard time catching the ground. I remember the wheels spun out against the gravel beneath them, and when the four-wheeler finally started moving, little me had a hard time holding on. I floored it the entire way home, stopped in the middle of the yard and burst into the house. Obviously, the first thing I did was ask my parents if they had contacted me, which they had not and hadn't for hours. I was in such a panic that there was no way my dad wouldn't have convinced had it been him. He was a practical joker, but he knew when the fun was over. I hate to think what might have happened had I continued sticking around the area, or if I hadn't figured out that it wasn't my dad pulling my leg. Nothing came of this incident though, and my childhood up there resumed as normal. Eventually, the weekend visit stopped, but the story doesn't end there. During my parents' divorce, I moved to live at the lake house permanently with my father, or at least until we could find something better. This was the only place that we could go when he left my mother, which is a long story in and of itself, but I won't get into that. My father had recently suffered from health issues, so I took a job at a nearby gas station, tobacco barn, to pay the bills and let him recuperate. Thankfully, the lake house had no bills save for electricity, water, and internet, so my small salary was enough to keep us going. I only worked there for 3 months, but those 3 months were by far the creepiest that I'd ever experienced. Within the first month, a rather tall and obese man became infatuated with me, and he couldn't have been creepier. He had short crew-cut hair and a slightly unkept beard and mustache combo. The first time that we ran into each other, he stared at me with these wide, crazy eyes, got his gas, and just stood there for 2 or 3 solid minutes, just staring. When I asked him if I could help him, he said nothing. Now, the part of the tobacco barn I worked in was strictly the gas side, and I was pretty much in a glass box with an opening to take people's money and give them their cigarettes, which I could not have been more thankful for. Several times this man came to visit, and he would leave to pump gas after staring at me awkwardly. About the 4th or 5th time, after I thought that he had left, I heard a knock on the other side of the barn on the glass. And there he was, face pressed against the glass, staring at me with this wide, manic grin, and waving at me with his fingers. It was enough to send me running for my manager when he left, demanding to go on break before I peed myself. The last time that I saw him, I will never forget though. It has been etched into my mind so deeply that I doubt bleach could scrub it away. He arrives as he usually did and orders his gas. This time, however, he reached through the hole in the glass and grabbed my hand before I could put the cash away in the cash register. It wasn't a violent grab, but it was firm enough to keep me from pulling away. Being a very sheltered 18-year-old, I froze in place. "I love you," he said, refusing to let go of my hand. I simply stared at him, unnerved and alarm bells ringing in my head. "Say it." "What?" I responded. "Say you love me." Naturally, I just wanted this guy to go away. And being so freaking scared out of my mind at this point of him, I stammered and I said it out of impulse. Maybe he would let me go and go away. I love you, I said uneasily. Call me if you need anything. What's my number? He asked again. This threw me off completely, and the look on my face probably gave away my confusion, because he repeated himself, despite my stammering that I did not know. Finally he said something that made my blood run cold. I felt like I was going to throw up. It's 911. He winked. This guy was the sheriff deputy, the person that I would have to call if I got into any sort of trouble in town. The person that I would have to call if I had a medical emergency, or if someone tried to rob me. And he wouldn't let go of my hand. I just nodded, trying to keep myself from shaking bad enough for him to feel it. He had never pulled up in a police car or anything, but when I talked to my manager, she confirmed what he said as being true. Once he did let go of me and went on his way, I retreated to the back and demanded to be relieved from the gas station area. I didn't care. I did not want to see that guy ever again. Thankfully, we moved soon after, so I never had to. But I will never forget the leering grin that man gave me every single time he purchased gasoline. You would think moving away would be the end of the story, but no. It got even worse when I went to college, and you wouldn't think that would be the case considering I was in Galveston. I needed to go to my counselor to discuss a few things, and this usually involved about 30 minutes of chit-chat, as me and my counselor had become close while I was attending school. During one of these chats, which my father had attended due to him attending school in the same classes as, it was in an effort to finally get his degree, I mentioned Onalaska, Texas, and how we had owned a lake house up there. Initially, the happy expression left my counselor's face. She informed me that she had been a social worker in that area for quite a few years, and suddenly my childhood playground took an extremely dark turn, and the sheriff at the gas station became a nightmare. Apparently that area was notorious for kidnappings and other horrible incidents. Whole neighborhoods, including police officers, were in on it, and it was common for people trying to out the incidents to either going missing or to be completely thrown out of the community through intimidation tactics. She proceeded to tell me of several cases she had worked on, careful to leave out confidential details of course, including incidents of entire families being in on the whole mess. When I told her about the sheriff that I had encountered, she kind of paled and wouldn't tell me anymore, except that she wasn't surprised. The conversation went on for over an hour and a half, but it was enough to make me never want to return to the small town that I had called my childhood summer home, and vowed to never ever bring any children I might have in the future there. So did the guy that intercepted my walkie-talkie signal and tried to lure me onto his boat. And to the creepy sheriff. Let's never meet again. For the love of God, please.